All right. Welcome, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's explainer. We are going to go on a really fascinating zoom out journey through a super eclectic and thought provoking archive from the blog Crabtree Biz. We're going to start on a micro level, looking at this beautiful explosion in digital art, and then we're going to zoom all the way out to a macro, incredibly intense socio-political simulation. It's essentially a roadmap of modern culture, media, and polarization, and I promise you it is going to be quite the ride.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. Section 1, we've got the blog art renaissance. Section 2 is media, politics, and policy. Section 3 dives into a divided nation hypothetical, and Section 4 covers the escalation to total war.
So, kicking things off with Section 1, the blog art renaissance, a creative explosion in the early 20s. Now, to truly wrap our heads around this, we need a clear definition. The archive describes blog art not as, paint splattered on a screen, but actually as a digital echo of early 20th century modernism. It's like, just as Cubism and Surrealism challenged traditional norms back in the day, blog art is breaking down modern boundaries right now. It is this creative expression fueled entirely by the incredible accessibility of blogging platforms. And why does this matter to us? Well, because it marks a profound shift in who actually gets to be called an artist. The text outlines 4 core characteristics that are really driving this movement. First off, the democratization of creativity. Basically, anyone with an internet connection can totally bypass traditional media gatekeepers. Second, multimedia mashups. Creators are literally weaving these vibrant tapestries of text, images, and video all together. Third, it's highly collaborative. It fosters these communities that constantly push boundaries. And fourth, it relies heavily on hybrid genre-bending forms. Think personal essays just seamlessly merging with investigative journalism, or poetry intertwining with photography. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer versatility of the medium we're talking about. On one hand, you have visual storytelling. These are those deeply immersive experiences that leverage photos and narrative text. But then, on the flip side, you have data-driven journalism, which uses infographics to make really complex information completely accessible. It just shows how the exact same digital tools can be used to elicit deep emotional responses or to just clarify hard, objective data. Moving right along to Section 2, Media, Politics, and Policy, analyzing the JRE interview. Now, looking at the source text, it notes a pretty drastic shift in public and media reception regarding Donald Trump over time. It points out that early in his entertainment career, he was warmly received by shows like The View and Oprah, and obviously enjoyed massive success with The Apprentice. However, the archive contrasts this with his later political reception. It impartially reports Trump's perspective here, that once he gained political traction and actually defied corporate pushback from networks like NBC, he faced what he saw as a coordinated campaign of opposition and rejection by those exact same media figures. So the crucial point for us is understanding the policy debate presented in the text, which we can look at side by side here. Under taxation, Trump's strategy emphasizes using tariffs to protect U.S. industries and lowering income taxes. The opposing viewpoint, however, argues that these cuts and tariffs just increase the national deficit. Regarding infrastructure, Trump favors relying heavily on private sector efficiencies, like Starlink, for instance, while the counterargument is that public spending remains absolutely necessary. Finally, on regulation, Trump's strategy focuses on deregulation to boost manufacturing and limit environmental red tape, whereas the opposing view maintains that environmental criticisms of practices like fracking hold legitimate weight. Actually, there is this one slightly more obscure but really interesting opinion highlighted in the interview outline. Alongside all those heavy discussions of policy and creating the Space Force, Trump playfully described Elon Musk's visionary traits and creativity as almost otherworldly or alien. It's a surprising little detail for sure, but it really underscores the heavy emphasis placed on private sector ingenuity within the specific political framework. All right, this brings us to Section 3, a divided nation hypothetical, underlying causes and alignments. Now, the essay we're looking at builds its hypothetical scenario on these widening ideological gaps. It maps out red states, located primarily in the South, Midwest, and Mountain West, as conservative, emphasizing traditional values and states' rights. Conversely, it identifies blue states, located mainly on the West Coast and Northeast, as liberal, advocating for progressive social policies and an expanded government role. The text posits that, in this thought experiment, these policies are increasingly seen as entirely incompatible. And this simulation, it doesn't just start with a single shot out of nowhere. It outlines a very specific cascade of flashpoints. It all begins with a highly contested presidential election, rife with allegations. That's followed by a Supreme Court unable to provide a definitive resolution. This judicial impasse then emboldens red state governors to outright defy federal mandates, which sparks violent civil unrest. Ultimately, the text theorizes this whole thing culminating in a formal secession movement, where states like Texas, Florida, and Georgia break off to form a new confederation. Let's take a step back and see how this tension actually builds before any fighting even starts. The text describes massive, sweeping ideological migrations. In Step 1, conservative military personnel resign from federal facilities to go offer their expertise to red states. In Step 2, law enforcement officers relocate due to ideological alignment, basically strengthening internal security for the seceding states. And by Step 3, mass civilian migrations drastically shift resources, economic power, and cultural cohesion. The map is, quite literally, redrawn by ideology. Which leads us to a very heavy Section 4, Escalation to Total War, the descent into chaos. The text maps out a terrifyingly rapid escalation here. It begins at point 1 with border skirmishes and cyber attacks. This quickly erupts into point 2, major ground operations. It specifically notes a Confederate victory at the Battle of Kansas City and a fierce defense of Houston. By point 3, the ideological divisions cause massive naval defections. And finally, point 4 reaches the absolutely unthinkable, the actual deployment of tactical nuclear weapons. To really wrap your head around how deeply this ideological divide fractures the military in this scenario, the source text details specific strategic seizures. It describes the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower defecting from Norfolk, Virginia, and the USS Abraham Lincoln defecting from San Diego, California. Both of these massive assets fall into the hands of the new Confederation. This massive shift in naval power and air operation capability severely alters the balance of the conflict. The peak of this hypothetical conflict is, quite frankly, solemn and catastrophic. The text details the Union deploying a tactical nuclear weapon on Fort Hood, Texas, which then prompts a devastating retaliation from the Confederate forces on Norfolk, Virginia. What follows is just total war, leading to global anarchy. The source describes an unimaginable humanitarian catastrophe. We're talking disease, complete grid sabotage, the rise of civilian militias and warlords. It cascades into global famine, and this desperate secret push for peace talks mediated by neutral countries, all under the looming threat of rogue nuclear ultimatums. Now let's take a collective breath here. Importantly, the archive does present a strong opposing opinion to this grim simulation. It reminds us that this is entirely speculative, arguing that a second civil war remains highly unlikely. This counterargument emphasizes the enduring resilience of American democratic institutions, the constant potential for political compromise and de-escalation, and the absolute immense economic and social costs that serve as massive deterrents to such a fracture. So, think about the journey we just took. We've zoomed from the democratized, collaborative beauty of blog art through the polarized lens of modern political media, all the way out to a devastating hypothetical fracture of a nation. What you should really take away from this explainer is the sheer scale of modern polarization presented in these texts, which leads us to our final thought for you to ponder today. Is our democracy genuinely resilient enough to navigate these divisions, or are the building blocks of this hypothetical scenario just a little bit closer than we'd like to admit? Keep learning, keep questioning, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.